Nestled in the rolling hills of Beverly Hills, the former home of James Stewart stands as an elegant reminder of Hollywood's golden age. Though the mansion has changed hands several times since the legendary actor's passing, whispers of eerie occurrences have persisted, unsettling its inhabitants and intriguing those who dare to investigate. The most chilling and frequently reported phenomenon is the sound of an old piano playing in the dead of night. The eerie notes drift through the halls, melancholic and deliberate, as if someone were lost in thought while playing. Yet, no piano has occupied the house in years. Former owners and visitors alike have searched in vain for the source of the music, but it always remains elusive, just beyond reach, just beyond explanation. Then there is the figure. Residents and passers-by have sworn they've seen the silhouette of a man standing on the mansion's balcony, his posture unmistakably pensive. He gazes out over the city, as if lost in memories of a world long gone. Some say he resembles Stewart himself, tall, dignified, with an air of quiet contemplation. But the moment one looks directly at him, he vanishes, dissolving into the night. One homeowner, a prominent film producer, recounted waking in the early hours to the unmistakable strains of "As Time Goes By" echoing softly through the house. Following the sound, he was drawn toward the grand balcony, only to feel an inexplicable chill and a fleeting sense of deep sorrow. He left the home within a year. Paranormal experts who have investigated the mansion suggest that Stewart's spirit may still linger, forever tethered to the home where he spent his final years. Some believe he is simply reliving the past, his love for music, his view over the city he once ruled, his memories of an era that has slipped away like the fading notes of a forgotten melody. Whether ghostly presence or mere legend, the James Stewart house remains one of Beverly Hills' most enduring mysteries. The haunting presence in the James Stewart house grew even more peculiar as time wore on. The piano, which had once only been heard in the dead of night, began to play at random times throughout the day. Morning, afternoon, evening, no time seemed immune to its ghostly notes. Yet, those who lived there never once found the instrument. It was as if the music itself was being summoned by an unseen hand, flowing through the very walls of the mansion. One night, a renowned writer fascinated by the stories of the house decided to spend a night there, hoping to capture some inspiration for his next novel. He had heard the rumors, of course, but he didn't believe in ghosts. That was, until the piano began to play, its haunting melody drifting up from the floorboards below. The writer, a man of reason, dismissed it as the wind or some other logical explanation. But as he stepped into the parlor to investigate, something stopped him dead in his tracks. In the center of the room stood a tall, dark figure, a man dressed in a suit that looked both timeless and out of place, as though he had stepped out of another era. The figure didn't move, but the air grew heavy with an almost palpable sense of longing, as if it were a piece of the house's soul standing before him. The writer's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to speak, to ask who the man was, but his mouth went dry, and his legs felt rooted to the floor. The figure turned slowly, its face obscured by shadow. But as it faced him, a chill swept through the room, and the faintest whisper barely audible reached his ears. It was a single word: "Remember," and just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished, leaving the writer standing alone in the empty room. The piano, too, had fallen silent, as if whatever presence had been there had been momentarily sated. The writer fled from the house that very night, unable to shake the sense that the mansion had shared something old, something lost that he could never fully grasp. But it wasn't only the inhabitants who had begun to feel the unease. Local children, who often played near the gates of the mansion, began telling stories of a man who watched them from the balcony. They spoke of seeing his face, kind but distant, his eyes following their every movement. And when they would wave, he would vanish, only to return the next day as though nothing had changed. The more people came to the house, the more the strange occurrences began to multiply. Guests at parties would sometimes find themselves inexplicably drawn to the grand staircase, as though they were being beckoned by something they couldn't explain. Once, a well-known actress, known for her sharp wit and strong skepticism, was seen standing at the top of the stairs, staring down with a look of profound sadness on her face. When asked what was wrong, she simply shook her head, her eyes distant, and muttered, "He's still here." Rumors swirled that James Stewart had never truly left, that his spirit had become bound to the house he had once cherished so deeply. But as more people gathered at the mansion, they began to uncover secrets that even the most seasoned investigators could not have anticipated. Hidden passages, locked rooms, strange markings on the walls, each discovery added another layer to the mystery. One investigator, driven by a need to understand, managed to uncover an old letter buried within the walls of the house. The letter, written in James Stewart's own hand, was addressed to a woman, someone unknown to the public. The contents of the letter, however, were even more cryptic than expected. Stewart wrote of an event, something tragic, something he could never fully forgive himself for. He spoke of guilt that would forever haunt him, and a promise he had made that could never be broken. But the final lines of the letter were what left everyone baffled. "I will wait for you. Always." The investigator, trembling, shared his discovery with others, but the mystery only deepened. Who was this woman? What promise had Stewart made? And why did it seem as though the house itself was still waiting for something? As the years passed, the mansion remained a place of fascination, its history entwined with the shadows of James Stewart's past. Yet, no one could answer the most pressing question. What was it that Stewart had truly left behind? And why did it feel as if the house, his beloved home, was waiting for something or someone? The answer remained elusive, just like the faint echoes of piano notes, still heard on quiet nights, drifting out over the city below. As time wore on, the house at the edge of Beverly Hills became a place of whispered rumors and fascination. Local historians, paranormal experts, and even curious souls from faraway places would come, eager to learn the secrets it held. But it was never the same for them. Some left in a hurry, while others vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions. One particularly daring historian, renowned for his research into lost Hollywood lore, spent weeks in the house, determined to piece together its tangled past. Armed with old blueprints of the mansion, he combed every room, every corner, searching for any hint that might shed light on the mystery. He was the first to uncover a hidden room behind a false wall in the library, a small, dimly lit chamber, untouched for decades. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of old books. But what caught his attention was a strange object resting on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was an old, intricately carved box, locked and sealed with symbols he didn't recognize. Despite the palpable sense of foreboding that lingered in the room, the historian couldn't resist. He opened the box, revealing a collection of fragile documents, pages yellowed with age. Among them, one letter stood out, bearing the same handwriting as the letter found earlier. But this time, it was addressed to someone far more mysterious, to the one I will never see again. As he read the letter, he began to piece together a story of love, loss, and a deep, inexplicable connection. Stewart had written of a woman who had once been the center of his world, someone whose existence he had kept hidden from the public eye. It was a love that had bloomed in secret, behind closed doors and drawn curtains. But tragedy struck, a terrible, unspoken tragedy that left Stewart broken and irrevocably changed. The letter spoke of a final moment, a parting, and a vow to wait for the return of this woman, even if it meant waiting for eternity. But the historian's discovery raised more questions than answers. Who was this woman? Was she the same person mentioned in the first letter, the one with whom Stewart had made his cryptic promise? And why had Stewart never spoken of her publicly? The historian's mind raced with possibilities. The more he delved into Stewart's life, the more inconsistencies he found. Public records mentioned a few fleeting romantic relationships, but no one with a name that matched the one in the letters. There was no trace of her, no photograph, no record of her existence. It was as though she had never been real. But the historian wasn't the only one drawn into the house's mystery. A former housekeeper, now elderly but sharp as ever, approached him with a warning. She had worked for Stewart in the final years of his life and had witnessed strange events that she had never dared to speak of. She spoke of late-night phone calls, whispered conversations in the dark, and a room in the basement that was always locked though she had never been allowed to enter. The housekeeper claimed that she had once seen a woman there, a woman who had never been introduced, never spoken of. The night she came, the housekeeper said, her voice trembling, there was a storm, terrible storm, and when the power went out, I saw her standing in the hallway. I tried to speak to her, but she vanished before I could even ask her name. The historian, intrigued by the housekeeper's story, began to investigate further. The locked room in the basement became his next focus. With the help of a local locksmith, he finally managed to gain entry. What he found inside was both chilling and surreal, a room that seemed to be a time capsule from the past, frozen in place. Old photographs lined the walls, some of James Stewart, others of a woman who, despite her obscured features, resembled someone familiar. A single piece of furniture, a chaise lounge, stood in the middle of the room, covered in dust, but still oddly pristine. And in the far corner, a large portrait, slightly tilted, revealed the face of the woman. Her eyes, though haunting, were unmistakable. The historian could hardly believe what he was seeing. It was the same woman from the letters, but there was something more, something deeper, something that pulled at his very core. Her expression was not one of sorrow or longing, but of recognition. It was as though she had been waiting for someone to find her. But as he reached out to examine the portrait, something strange happened. The temperature in the room dropped. His breath became visible in the air, his fingers numb as if the very atmosphere had thickened. The moment he touched the frame, a loud creak echoed through the house, followed by a distant sound. Piano playing. The historian raced back to the main house, but as he entered the grand hall, his eyes locked on the balcony. Standing there, just as others had described, was the silhouette of the man James Stewart, or what seemed to be him. But this time, his figure wasn't a shadow. It was solid, defined, and the faintest of smiles curled on his lips as he turned toward the historian. "Do you understand now?" he whispered, though his lips never moved. The historian froze, his mind racing. He felt a presence behind him, the weight of something ancient, something unresolved. And in that moment it became clear. The house, the stories, the music, it was all part of a puzzle. And he had just unlocked a piece that he couldn't fully comprehend. The piano played louder now, the melody rising as though calling him forward. The historian had no choice but to follow. But what awaited him at the end of this path? Was it a truth he was ready to face, or something darker that should remain buried in the past? The haunting had only just begun. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. As the historian approached the piano, the air seemed to grow heavier with each step, the music enveloping him like a suffocating fog. The notes were haunting, beautiful, yet unsettling, as if the piano itself were alive with a consciousness of its own. The closer he got, the more his surroundings seemed to distort. The grand hall, once pristine, now appeared ancient, as though time itself was bending in the house's presence. But it wasn't the piano that drew his attention now. It was the mirror positioned just across from the instrument. He hadn't noticed it before, but as the music played on, the mirror seemed to shimmer, its surface rippling as though disturbed by some unseen force. It was a large, ornate mirror, its frame dark and intricate, adorned with symbols that looked strangely familiar, almost identical to the ones on the box he had found in the hidden room. As he gazed into it, his reflection wavered, and for a moment, he thought he saw someone standing behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there, just the shadows of the house, deep and endless. The reflection in the mirror, however, lingered. It wasn't his own face staring back at him, but a different one, a woman's. She was beautiful, her features soft and delicate, but her eyes were filled with an unmistakable sorrow, as if she had been trapped in that reflection for eternity, waiting for someone to free her. Her lips barely moved, but the historian could hear her voice in his mind, her words a whisper that echoed in his thoughts. "Find me, before it's too late." He stepped closer, entranced by her gaze, but before he could reach out, a sudden, sharp sound interrupted the music. The piano, which had been playing relentlessly, ceased, leaving a silence that was almost suffocating. In the stillness, the historian felt a presence behind him. He could sense it without turning around. It was the figure on the balcony again. But this time it wasn't a distant silhouette. He could feel the weight of the gaze, the penetrating stare that seemed to burn into him. Slowly, as if in a trance, the historian turned around to face the figure. There, standing in the shadows, was James Stewart, or what appeared to be him. He looked exactly as he had in the portraits, wearing his trademark suit, his face solemn, but with a strange intensity in his eyes. The historian couldn't move. He felt as though the figure were drawing him in, pulling him closer to the truth he wasn't ready to uncover. "You've found her," the figure said, though his voice was no longer the calm, familiar tone of the actor the world once knew. It was deeper, more gravelly, as if the years had worn his voice thin. "But you've also found something else. Something you weren't meant to see." The historian's heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't look away. He had to know more. He had to understand what was happening in this house, why Stewart's presence was so powerful, why the woman's sorrowful eyes were forever etched in his mind. "Who is she?" the historian asked, his voice trembling. "What happened here?" James Stewart's figure shifted slightly, and for a moment, the historian thought he saw something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, of pain before it was gone, replaced by an unsettling calm. "She was my muse," Stewart said, his words heavy with emotion. "But she was also my undoing." Before the historian could ask another question, the piano began playing again, this time more aggressively, almost as if it were trying to communicate something. The music was faster now, erratic, but there was something undeniably familiar about it. A melody the historian had heard before, but couldn't quite place. It was the same tune, the one that had been haunting the house for so long. And yet, this time, there was an added layer to it, a subtle, distorted harmony that made the notes feel like they were coming from somewhere far beyond the house itself, as if the very walls were reverberating with the emotions trapped inside. The historian felt his head spin, the room around him starting to blur as the music intensified. It wasn't just sound now, it was a presence, an overwhelming force that seemed to push at the edges of his mind. He wanted to escape, but his feet were frozen to the floor. The reflection of the woman in the mirror grew clearer, her face more distinct, as though she were coming closer. "Do you understand now?" Stewart's voice came again, but it was softer this time, almost a whisper. She was never meant to be part of this world, but she couldn't leave. Not until the promise was fulfilled. The historian's pulse raced. The words made no sense until he looked back at the piano. The keys were no longer being pressed by invisible hands, but were moving of their own accord, as if the music itself were being played by an unseen force. And then, in a flash of recognition, the historian understood. The melody was not just music, it was a key to something hidden deep within the house, something that had been locked away for decades. And it wasn't just the piano that was calling to him, it was the house itself. The house was alive with a history that couldn't be forgotten, and it was begging him to uncover it. But just as the historian stepped forward, drawn by the music, the figure of James Stewart faded into the shadows, leaving behind only a whisper. "Be careful. Some promises are meant to be broken." The historian hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at him, but the pull of the mystery was too strong. The woman's face in the mirror seemed to beckon him forward. The house, with all its secrets, its whispers, and its haunting music, was waiting. And so, with a heart heavy with both fear and fascination, the historian took another step. But the question remained, what was he truly about to uncover? The historian's steps echoed through the house as he approached the piano. The music swelled louder, a final, desperate crescendo, as if urging him forward. He could feel the weight of the house pressing down on him, the secrets of decades past coiling around him like smoke. As his hand reached out toward the piano, the mirror behind him rippled again, and the woman's face, the one he had seen before, seemed to change. Her sorrow was gone, replaced by a quiet, knowing smile. Her lips moved, but this time, the words were clear in his mind. "It's time." The historian's fingers brushed the piano keys, and in that instant, the house seemed to breathe deep, heavy, as though the very foundation was shifting. The music stopped abruptly, and everything fell silent. In the mirror, James Stewart's figure reappeared, but now, he wasn't alone. The woman stood beside him. Together, they gazed at the historian, their faces calm, as if at peace at last. The house's haunting presence had lifted, the music had stopped, and the weight of its secrets had been revealed. The historian turned to leave, but as he stepped out the door, he heard one last whisper, as faint as a memory. "Thank you." And then the house was still. The mystery had been solved, but it had cost the historian something more than he had expected, an understanding that some promises, no matter how old, never truly fade away. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.